Welcome to today's session. We're here today to talk about IT teams and how they need a break and how automating Edge helps with those organizations. Today, we're here to talk about reducing costs and data complexity with your current IT teams through automation. My name is Paul Nashawaty, and I'm a senior analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and I cover application and infrastructure modernization. I'm joined today with Craig and Brian. Craig, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'm Craig Theriac. I'm the Vice President of Product Management at Scale Computing. I've been with the company for about 12 years and seen all sorts of really interesting transitions over the time. I would say the most interesting transition is the growth of edge computing, which is what we're here to talk about today with things like the Intel NUC and the Scale Computing platform that operates it.
Thank you, Craig. And Brian?
Yeah, Brian McCarson. I'm a vice president and the general manager of the next unit of compute group at Intel. And I feel like I'm one of the luckiest guys on the planet. I have an amazing team that's creating fantastic products where companies like Scale Computing can make businesses get better outcomes through advanced automation and better IT infrastructure. So I'm excited to be here today and looking forward to this chat.
Excellent. Thank you both very much for being here today. Great topic, and let's just jump right into it. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about the data that we're going to share here. Enterprise Strategy Group is a primary research analyst firm that covers go-to-market strategies and focuses on the research that's global data that we have across the different sectors in the market. We are talking about the data in this presentation that was captured over the last year. And so the research that we're sharing here is fresh data and current data. So really feel confident in the information that we're sharing. So with that, let's jump right into the agenda and let's talk about what we're looking at. So today we're here to talk about managing the skill gap and what happens at these different locations. We're seeing the edge locations and edge computing it's important for growth. We're also seeing some of the common challenges across IT and infrastructure teams that we have to address. So we have to look at this in the context of how the ease of use of cloud and application portability plays into this, as well as how speed and rapid time to value really does affect the organizations and how they're moving in. So there's a lot here to unpack, and so let's just jump right into the data. When we looked at the first part of this webinar, we discussed the managing of the IT skill gap and the skill gap issues. We find that the research at the edge location is really on the rise. The growth is on the rise. Core data centers are not growing as fast as they used to, and the infrastructure is growing to and moving towards alternative smaller locations. So let's take a look at this data. What we see, in fact, is in the recent ESG study that there's a significant growth at the edge location over the next 2 years. We see that 30% of respondents indicate that their organizations have 500 to 1,000 edge locations. With that said, this growth, and we see latency, we see compliance issues, we see growth, cost factors that organizations are challenged with at the edge. And then combining this with limited to no IT staff, physical constraints that tied to connectivity as well as outages lead to unpredictable demands. So there's really a lot of challenges here that happen at the edge. And edge locations are on the rise, as we see. Core data centers are not growing as fast, as I said, and infrastructure is moving to these smaller locations. But when we look at the skill gap issue, we see that skill is a challenge across many sectors in organizations. But you can see skill gaps rises to the top of this survey, as 29% of the respondents indicate skill gap is a challenge. So this leaves organizations with the challenge of working with the resources they have, which they may be skilled resources, but they're running the business and they're trying to keep basically the wheels on the bus, right? When they're hiring new resources, 67% of organizations are hiring IT generalists over IT specialists because they just don't have the ability to find those IT specialists that they need. And many of these locations, what we find as organizations are scaling out to different edge locations and such, they just don't even have IT resources at these locations. So it really does require an ease of use solution. And when we look at the significant skill gaps, it really truly is found everywhere. We see IT operations bubbling up to about 30% of the respondents here. And, and this just it expands out in the challenges when you look at the growth of these applications, these workloads, and the different locations of how these workloads are expanding, right? So Craig, I'd like to talk a little bit about like fleet management here, right? And how fleet management really matters and how zero touch provisioning really helps with the skill gap issue. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think before you can even talk about fleet management and before you can talk about zero touch provision, you kind of have to think about the wider spectrum of what's happening out in the market, right? So you kind of see these massive shifts of the last, I mean, talk about 40, 50 years now, right? Where you've gone from mainframe to, distributed model with client server computing and then to more centralized data centers. And in the last 2 decades, really a movement to cloud above anything else. It's kind of a cloud first mentality. And now that we're starting to see things shift back to this distributed model where people are putting things out at the edge of the network, it's like, well, who's going to manage that? How is that going to be managed? If you've gone all in on cloud, there probably isn't anybody on staff that even has the IT expertise to do that for you, much less are they located at those locations. And so you factor that in, you think, all right, how will people solve this, right? And so the way I see it is that they will either, if they haven't gone all in on cloud, and these people are starting to put more resources out at the edge, or they've got their centralized team that's in charge of the data center that's in charge of now putting IT platforms out at the edge of the network, they're going to ask those teams to do that. Or if they don't have those resources or want to augment their team, they're going to work with system integrators or managed service providers, somebody with a really deep vertical expertise in that area to be able to help with that. Whoever is actually doing the deployment, that's where fleet management, that's where zero touch provisioning comes in, right? So you decide to put these things at 500,000 locations like you showed on that last slide. It's like, well, you're going to need visibility into what's going on at those sites. You don't necessarily, as you said, you don't have IT expertise there. You're not going to send someone out to every site. You're not going to roll a truck anytime a drive fails. So you have to have visibility into what's going on out there. You've got to have some level of automation at the site itself to where it can kind of heal if there is some type of problem with the infrastructure. And then finally, going back to the zero touch provisioning, that really is all around automating the initial setup of a site, right? So if you don't have IT expertise on site, you have to be able to stage things in such a way where you can just plug them in, let them reach out to your centralized repository. In our case, that's what we call Fleet Manager, and have its configuration automatically be deployed for them. So you don't have to have keyboard, you don't have to have video, you don't have to have a mouse, you don't have to have the IT expertise out there at the edge. And that's how I see it all fit together.
Yeah, Craig, that makes a lot of sense. And when I think about our research, and you touched on a couple of areas, in order to address these challenges, these remote locations that organizations are dealing with, they, like you said, they don't have the technical staff. So they can either hire somebody, which is typically not a way to do it, or they can work with a service delivery partner to help deploy, but then that could become costly at sometimes too. So having that ease of use delivery is definitely a way to do it. And Brian, I want to bring you into the conversation here because I think that there's a lot here to talk about.
Yeah. So, as you stated, you've got 3 options if you're a business owner. Either you go hire a bunch of people to roll trucks every time there's an issue, and there's a huge upfront cost associated with that and a huge operational cost associated with it. You go, option 2 is you go and hire a massive IT department that can create custom code to manage each and every endpoint that you have, so you have fewer trucks that you have to roll every time there's an issue. Or you engineer in an automated solution that is scalable, zero touch, easy to deploy, and can have over-the-air updates. And there might be a different cost structure for each one of those, and the payout over time may vary as well. But most businesses that I am in discussions with are very much interested in how can I make my solution more affordable long-term, and how do I create a better end user experience and a better business outcome by designing in and engineering in automation for scalability wherever possible. And that's just the direction most companies are going when they're trying to plan not just for what do I need to do in the next quarter, but what do I need to do next quarter, next year, the year after that. And so really building for the future in mind is what I highly recommend for anyone looking into this space.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I agree. I mean, when we talk to organizations, and there's there's direction from the board, from the companies that basically said, we need to reduce our costs. We need to figure out a way to understand how to do this and use operational efficiencies. It really kind of dovetails nicely into our next part of the presentation, when there's a big push to move to cloud and cloud efficiencies and trying to use all the new ways of operational efficiencies. Brian, to your point, that kind of future proofing the environment of how you growing to an environment, but it also can't be done with unlimited pockets, right? You just can't go out there and say, I have unlimited budget. And if there is an organization out there that has that, please let me know, because I'll be happy to work with you directly. But with that said, I think that when organizations are looking at ease of use, they're looking at cloud deployment, but they're also taking into consideration that last topic of the IT skill gap. But organizations are looking at application portability as a way to kind of address that movement of information and resources around their ecosystem. Right. And one way to do that is their organizations are looking at container adoption, right? They're looking at how containers are being used to shift, basically use applications across different locations. And we can see here that the light blue is showing that the respondents indicate that 50% or more of the applications are running in microservices or container-based architectures. We see that 40% of the respondents are saying that 50% of their applications are running in that space. We see that 49% of the respondents indicate that's 31 to 50%. But what's interesting is the left side of the slide, that yellow is saying that the organizations or the respondents that are indicating that they're running 30% or less of their applications, they're really considering it. Right, that yellow is 60% of those respondents are saying they're really considering and thinking about those operational efficiencies. But when organizations move to, say, a cloud or a cloud native architecture and using containers, they have to take into consideration about how that workload is processing information. And when we look at the portability of the workload, and of course, when we look at the organizations with these hybrid strategies, 30% of organizations indicated that they're running their cloud native applications on a combination of public and private cloud data centers. That includes the edge location. And this is because the data is being processed in place, right? So when data is being processed in place, it needs to be really the place itself is a key factor. So, Craig, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I think that there's a lot here that aligns nicely to scale.
Yeah, no, and even outside of scale, I mean, if you've ever had to develop an application and had to do that in kind of that monolithic style that everyone was used to before containers, you'll understand why there's this mass adoption. I mean, it's kind of a train wreck. You start developing locally, you push that to a test environment. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Then you say, okay, great, it's working in test. Let's push that to production. And that push to production, all of a sudden something breaks. You've got some dependency, some library you forgot about, or some version of Java that just doesn't work with whatever you've pushed up there. And it's kind of a nightmare with containerization. I mean, the whole concept is you want portability. You want to be able to contain everything you need to run that application wherever you're running it at. And that doesn't matter if it's in the public cloud. It doesn't matter if it's running on your desktop in kind of a development environment. It doesn't matter if it's running out on a small device like this Intel NUC that I'm holding here out at the edge of your network. You want to be able to interact with your application, develop your application in such a way that it can really run anywhere. And then, kind of the adoption that we see in edge computing and at scale with our focus in that area is really being driven based on where does it make sense to run those applications? And it's no longer can I run this in the cloud or locally? It's really, where do I need to run it for the best latency, for the best throughput, for whatever the things and people that are interacting with that application, where does it need to be hosted in order to give them that best experience? And so that's driving the edge computing need. But we're seeing the containerization of just about everything right now because of the portability more than anything.
Yeah, and we're seeing that as well in our research. That having that uniformity across the different locations is key. So having that ability to access the data, access the containers, access the information where it lives. Brian, love to get your thoughts on this, because I know you have a couple of thoughts. We talked about this prior to the recording here. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think we're lucky that the consumer world has really pushed a lot of advancements in how people interact with devices and how there's a really healthy and scalable edge to cloud experience. When you've got a phone that you're going to use and you expect an application to be downloaded seamlessly from the cloud, you expect to be able to interact with that, remove the application, update the application, and not have to change the core software on your device each time you do that. Now, we're all spoiled in the fact that I think we take that for granted, but there's a lot of technology that goes into making that possible. There's identity management, there's device management that comes with those endpoints. There's a very limited number of models of devices that are deployed to consumers to ease that. But when you talk about the broad embedded and IoT world, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of different endpoints that you need to connect to, each running different RTOSes, different operating systems, some 15 years old and still in use, others trying to come in with modern AI-based applications. There is an easier way to manage the complexity of that ecosystem. And that's using a cloud native approach where you've got containerization of applications to make it seamless for them to go get deployed in a variety of different environments without having to create 50, 60, hundreds, potentially thousands of unique applications depending on the embedded use case. And so what my team specializes in is creating a whole array. We have over 600 different configurations of NUCs with a massive amount of I/O and performance capabilities. But these NUCs are designed in a way that you can basically scale across any configuration. And regardless of which form factor you choose, what processor family, what I/O you need, you can use technology to be able to deploy applications in a standardized environment. And we, in a sense, create that normalization at the edge. So, millions of different endpoint configurations can be plugged into, from an embedded space, can be plugged into that NUC. And then you get a cloud-like experience right there at the edge if you choose a great software partner that can actually deliver that over-the-air experience, that application portability, deployability, and manageability experience, and then live in a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment, just like we're used to on our smartphones.
Yeah, both Craig and Brian, you both touched on a lot of factors, a lot of reasons why organizations should be considering, what they're doing at the edges. And I'm sure organizations sometimes can be a bit overwhelmed. So having that ability to normalize it, I think, you made that comment of normalizing it. It makes a lot of sense, right? It makes a lot of sense to have a simplified kind of deployment model that works, right? And when we look at the applications themselves, as they're normalized, as they're kind of working in a specific way, using that portability, it's no wonder why our research shows that 19% of respondents indicated that application portability is critical to their environment, and 67% of respondents indicated it's very important because they're moving this information around. Now, I will say that they're not necessarily moving data around, so to speak, but they're moving like maybe the results of the data, because the data's growth at the edges and the locations is growing substantially, but the results need to be moving around. And then you also have this ability to have burst capacity. So if you have the challenge where you need to add on more, you mentioned scale. Well, scale is definitely a factor when it comes to, say, retail or FinServe or healthcare. Even when you're trying to have that burst capacity of resources, you can scale up as needed. So, I think it's a main factor. But I guess we just really have to kind of reemphasize on portability, that hybrid cloud strategies and portability do have a connection, right? And then when they come together. Let's jump to the last section of the presentation. And we've had a great discussion so far around the edge, but we also should look at that speed of rapid time to value. As we understand these challenges, the next logical question is how are businesses impacted, and what requirements are needed to be resilient, to be more resilient in the organization, right? And this includes hybrid cloud deployments and processing information and location. But when we asked respondents about their organizations and how they're using hybrid cloud, and they're looking at the application delivery, we asked about the production applications and how they were being deployed. What we found was 46% of the respondents indicated that their organizations are deploying multiple production applications in a hybrid cloud model. And that could be different locations, including the edge locations, right? We found that 31% of respondents indicate that they're deploying a single production application in a hybrid cloud model. So there's a lot of use cases here where that model is being used across these different locations, as to kind of reiterate those points that we were talking about. But clearly, hybrid cloud adoption is growing, and organizations are looking to scale the delivery model. So let's take a look at the data sets around this. When we look at the market landscape is growing clearly in terms of cloud native and cloud native adoption. Organizations are currently deploying 88% of their production applications and server workloads on cloud infrastructures or on platform services. So there's a lot of growth there. We see that infrastructure as a service is a preferred method for cloud native application deployments, but organizations are not just deploying on one cloud. What we see is 31% of respondents indicated that they've deployed on many unique public cloud infrastructure service providers. What's more important, the data point here, is that right side of the slide, and I don't have it called out specifically, but if you take the numbers and you add them up, 89% of respondents indicated that they're running on 2 or more CSPs. So they're running across multiple locations, multiple clouds, multiple environments, and having that ability to manage all that is incredibly important. So providers that are differentiating their offerings by augmenting with foundational container orchestration capabilities such as distributed management, across those multiple clusters, serverless capabilities, application lifecycle integration, policy management, and monitoring and security. These are just some of the areas that really kind of bubble up as in our research. I think this is also requires organizations to expend more resources when they look at these services that they have to offer, and really just to really navigate all these additional services. So, Craig, I think what we can do here is talk a little bit about, I understand the data from the study, and talk a little bit about how this impacts, how organizations are running.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot, as you mentioned, with as many different platforms that people are having to run on, there are a lot of different tools and things that they're going to have to deploy to manage and orchestrate across those. And that applies to scale computing with our platform all the way through to, the Amazons of the world. Whatever platform you're deploying on, if you're going to have to manage and orchestrate and monitor across multiple, you have tool sets that you're going to have to put in place. And what's interesting, Brian and I were actually at a show maybe 2-3 weeks ago now, and we were specifically talking to developers at the time and going through, what are the 3 key criteria that we hear from these developers, and it's usually somewhere around scalability, which I think we touched on today, right? And it's not actually what's interesting about scalability. Yes, it is about scaling out resources, but it's also about the horizontal scalability that we hear of, when you're looking at 500 to 1,000 sites, having a right-sized solution at each of those sites obviously is going to multiply the number of private clouds that you have under management there. The repeatability is key, right? You have to have a tool set like the zero-touch provisioning, even things like Ansible to be able to orchestrate not just the infrastructure, but also the applications and the other things in the environment all through a common tool set. And the last thing we talked about there was interoperability. And I think that's really what this comes down to. It's if you're going to look to put a solution out there at the edge of the network, how are these systems going to be interoperating with the other things like all the other decisions you've had to make in your environment? And that could be legacy virtual machines that you've had running there for the last 15, 20 years. That could be the tool set that you're using to manage across these different public clouds and private clouds. And that's, everything from IBM Edge Application Manager, Avasa, pick your Kubernetes distribution of choice. Interoperating with those is really key to successful deployment because you're going to have many teams involved in this. And so whatever tool set of choice they have, it kind of has to work.
Yeah, I like that. It's meeting the customer where they're at, right? It's basically using the tool set of what they're using and having the delivery points and the solutions that offer that. Brian, I'd love to get your take on how this may be impacting, challenges from the data center core to the edge, maybe even to the cloud, even on how it all kind of interacts with one another. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things here I think are really important when we talk about scale. At the scalability of a deployment from the first proof of concept or pilot all the way through to broad adoption out in the market is going to have a total cost of ownership over time assessment. And you have to be able to understand that there's going to be infrastructure changes that are going to come from various cloud service providers. There may be pricing changes, and building a solution that isn't locked into just one specific solution provider gives you the flexibility of choice. You can go shop around for your cloud infrastructure, your network infrastructure, if you've picked the right solution architecture. And if you're out thinking about, well, not only do I need to think about my service contract with the network or with my cloud service provider, but I need to understand how my workloads may be changing over time. And most businesses that I talk to, whether they're large enterprise, small and medium businesses, are looking at adding new workloads at the edge. They're looking at ways that they can use artificial intelligence capabilities to improve customer experiences, to improve business outcomes, to make the work environment safer, more productive, more engaging for customers, for employees. All of this requires compute. And if you have to send large volumes of data over the network and process those in the cloud, even given that there's great economy of scale with network infrastructure and cloud infrastructure build out, it may not be the best solution for you from an experience perspective, from a data privacy, data security perspective. It may be a better business outcome for you to have a edge to network to cloud solution orchestrated. And what's good for you today may be different tomorrow or the year after, because you may not even know the full breadth of what workloads you're going to deploy. And so when we talk about building in a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, scalable infrastructure, it's giving you the choice. You're basically buying the option to be able to have flexibility in the future by doing things the right way up front with how you architect things. And what's crazy to me right now is, could you imagine if every time you needed to upload a new update to your banking app, if Verizon or AT&T had to roll a truck to your house and update the firmware and software on your phone so that you can get the latest version? Yet we have multi-billion-dollar companies using that exact technique today. Anytime there's something that needs to be updated on their fleet, they got to bring all the trucks off the streets, take them back to a warehouse or a shop, reflash them, re-update the software. Same if you got to update infrastructure in a retail store. If you have a broad chain, you got to send somebody out to go do that. That's such an archaic experience, and the technology exists today. We all know it because we demand it in our daily lives. But yet enterprises haven't gotten to the point that they trust that the infrastructure is there. And now we've got companies like Scale Computing that are making this a reality today for enterprises. So you don't have to go back to the old pager days of personal communications and how we use smartphones today. You can advance your enterprise, advance your business to have these sort of scalable, easy to use experiences without compromising security and without compromising your total cost of ownership.
Excellent points, Brian. Excellent points. I think that you're spot on. And I love the analogy that you use. I can't imagine having any more interaction with my cell phone provider than I do already. So, but with that said, Craig, I think what Brian was talking about with the necessary compute at the edge, I understand that there's a product launch that's coming out around, or it's out now, I believe, that's around the Intel NUC. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So just a few weeks ago, we announced availability around this product. So this is the Intel NUC Enterprise Edge Compute built with scale computing. And as you can imagine, we're effectively taking all the great things about the Intel NUC and combining that with scale computing. So, the concept of the density, the performance that this provides, of, the small form factor. I said, I've got a handful of these running in my house here. It's actually quiet enough. You probably can't even hear it on the video today, but these things, they're perfectly made for the edge because they're such a small form factor. They require such low power that you can really place them anywhere. And you combine that with the enterprise grade HCI stack that we have at Scale Computing, and all of a sudden you have something that's highly available, something that's scalable, something that's really simple to deploy and then manage after the fact. And we're just seeing great adoption of it so far. So, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in retail, whether you're in manufacturing, really anywhere that you have little to no IT resources, this is going to be a fit for you. So we've got a QR code on screen here. I would just invite you to go visit the website through that QR code and learn more about the product.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. It sounds pretty powerful. So looking forward to learning more about it in our future briefings as well. Brian, before we wrap up here, I'm coming to the end of our session. I'd love to give you the last word if you want to leave the audience with some comments.
You bet. If you're used to and spoiled by the power of the cloud, in that you can optimize the amount of resources you need, containerize applications in the cloud, make them portable from one cloud location to another, and make it easy for employees or customers to access that information in a secure way. If you love that stuff, that's what's happening at the edge. And what we're trying to enable at the edge is giving you that low-cost infrastructure from a computing hardware perspective that you can hook up to literally anything at a multi-million-dollar advanced machine and run AI-based machine learning on it. That same box can run a digital sign. It can be used in healthcare to improve patient outcomes. Can be used in a home to stream media. There's literally infinite number of possibilities of how you can deploy these edge devices and know that they're highly reliable. They're designed, every NUC is designed to be run continuously at maximum workload for 3 consecutive years with incredible reliability. We design them specifically so that you never have to worry about the hardware. And then you can focus on the value-added services, applications, and features that you can seamlessly deploy from 1 to thousands of endpoints if you have the right provisioning, manageability, containerization, and application portability solution provider at your disposal. And so our objective here in the next unit of compute group is to make the edge compute experience as cost effective, as seamless as the cloud computing experience is, with our partners like you see it at Scale Computing. So you don't have to worry about vendor lock-in. You don't have to worry about OS lock-in. You can choose open source. You can choose proprietary third-party solutions. You can choose to change your vendors over time from a network infrastructure, cloud services infrastructure, and not have to go rip and replace, roll trucks, send people out to go manually flash devices like we've done in the past. That's the power of where we're at today in the state of technology. And I'm excited about seeing how this improves patient outcomes, customer outcomes, employee safety, reduces the environmental impact of us living our daily lives and running businesses. I think there's a world of opportunity ahead of us, and I'm delighted that I've got to spend time with Scale Computing on making this vision a reality.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. And Craig, any final words?
Well, I'll just leave you with this, which is that, the edge we're seeing all this growth in it. And as Brian said, it comes down to somebody's trying to increase revenue or decrease costs. And that is going to come through in those patient outcomes and kind of the other environmental things that we talked about. Given that the edge is not a tier one data center, and it's all the differences between a tier one data center that you have to take into account. The form factor matters. The manageability matters. Getting something stood up without having to roll a truck matters, and it just is exponential. It's not just a single site. Not everything can be bespoke, and so you need a homogeneous way to interact with this infrastructure, and that's really what we're providing alongside Intel on this. And so, I mean, from my perspective, I've enjoyed the conversation. I just want to say thank you, Paul. I've really enjoyed today.
No, thank you both. So, leaving the audience with, we covered a lot in a very short period of time, and this is just really the tip of the conversation. So it really does require a lot more kind of discussion points. But when you're thinking about where your organization's going, managing your skill gap, we talked about that. We talked about ease of use of cloud and application portability is key, and that speed of rapid time to value really does play into the success of your business KPIs. With that, I want to thank Craig and Brian for joining me today. I also want to thank the audience. It's been really great having you here, and hopefully you've had a lot to think about during this session, and have a great day. Thank you very much.